Again, welcome to everybody. I know we've got folks calling in from all over, and it's just wonderful to have you on this call, wonderful to have your presence. And we want to start off with just a quick introduction for those of you who don't know the two of us. This is Jamie and Susan Alden. And a little background on us is we are Army veterans. We both graduated from the United States Military Academy at West Point in 1997. I know we've got we might even have some 97 or some West Point graduates out there. So aloha to you. And so I got out of the Army after our first kid was born and opened up a wellness center in Fayetteville, North Carolina, outside of the largest military installation in the world. Jamie stayed in for a career in the Army Special Forces, and we've been a military family for most of our adult lives.
Since we've been a family.
Yeah. But I tell you what, our next chapter, this chapter that we're in now, has been one that has been every bit as rewarding and exciting and interesting. And part of that is because of what we're going to share with you, tonight, what Dr. Brian Dixon is going to tell you about. You know, we've always been passionate about our own health, conscientious about our own health, as you, I'm sure you have as well. You wouldn't be on this call if you didn't have an interest in health. But where I got interested in, or I should say we got interested in particularly what we're going to share today, was after my dad was diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer, and he never smoked a day in his life. He lived a healthy life. He ate healthy. He exercised. He enjoyed the great outdoors, and sure enough, he got a devastating cancer diagnosis. And so I started diving into, I was introduced to what we're going to share with you tonight shortly after he received that diagnosis. And I was also in the midst of some of my own health challenges with my gut. And these products kind of pulled me out of my own health crisis and got me focused in thinking about the potential of what we can do with the power of plants and our amazing, incredible bodies, our own genome. And so that is what's really brought us here today to this call. Jamie and I consider ourselves servant leaders. We are passionate, big vision kind of people. And if you're on this call, I imagine you are too. And so you were drawn here for a reason, and we are super excited to share our very special guest with you today, who is really helping us help humanity.
Absolutely. No, so thanks, Susan. So what I want to do is just quickly, Brian introduced Dr. Brian Dixon. Okay, so he sent us a bio that's about that thick. We need to expand that a little bit. The man is too humble. So just give me a second and let me explain to you who we're about to listen to. First, he's an all-around great dude. So he is just an all-around great dude. You can drink a beer with him. You can throw cornhole with him. He is great to talk to, and he can go from molecular biology to, the latest sporting events. So he's just really great to talk to, and just really great person with a beautiful family and a wonderful family, wonderful man. So let me just give you a little bit of his background. He earned his PhD in molecular cellular biology from Oregon State University, right? He also did his postdoctoral work there with the renowned Linus Pauling Institute. Okay. He began his career working for one of the world's largest biotech companies, developing 2 cancer diagnostics. And if that wasn't enough for this competitive triathlete, he also then transitioned to nutrition and has been in the nutritional industry. He's loving this, I know, for over 13 years, where he's done some pretty remarkable things, including developing products with over a dozen filed US and international patents. Okay. He has authored scientific peer-reviewed manuscripts on topics like cancer, antioxidants, cellular signaling, gene regulation, stress coping mechanisms, weight management. I mean, you name it, sports nutrition, recovering following intense exercise, which is I'm very much interested in, the role of nutrition in recovery from surgery, inflammation, which we all have, immunity, which we're all concerned about, the aging process, which we all go through, and NRF2 activation. Okay. So he's also researched nutrients like glutathione, vitamin D, plant polyphenols, and what is that? Other phytonutrients, right?
Phytonutrients.
Phyto.
See, Jamie can't even say it. He's a
Phyto.
smart guy.
Phyto, I don't know. It's all plant stuff. So at the end of the day, he's done a lot of amazing things in this industry. We are just feel so blessed and fortunate to not only learn from him, but also be a partner with him and be a friend of his. So I just want to introduce Dr. Brian Dixon. Brian, thank you for taking the time tonight, man. I'll leave it over to you. But as Brian presents, if you have any questions, please just put them in the chat. Any questions are free game. So just put them in the chat and then we'll get to them, at the end. So Dr. Dixon, I hand it over to you. Thank you for sharing your time.
Yeah, well, Susan, Jamie, thank you so much for having me tonight. It's a pleasure to see you guys, and Happy New Year. I haven't had a chance to wish you face to face, and Happy New Year to everybody on the call. Really appreciate you guys taking the time. And my wife and I had the chance to meet Jamie and Susan just this summer. I think would have been the first time we met face to face, and we just had an amazing time up at one of the ski resorts here up above Salt Lake City, Utah. And I don't know, became fast friends. I just have nothing but respect for these two and everything that they're trying to do to help people, especially our veteran and other first responder communities. So my hat's off to you. Thank you for your service, you guys. And thank you to anybody else who might be on the call for your service. And then maybe just a little bit of a selfish personal note. I see some friendly faces on the call here tonight. I think a lot of you maybe have had a chance to meet my wife, and today's her birthday. So she had to go to Colombia. She's Colombian. So I had to go to Colombia to take care of some family business. So unfortunately we can't be together, but if you find it in your heart, maybe take a second and wish her a happy birthday. I'd appreciate it. Help me make her day from afar. Hey, Susan, do you mind giving me privileges to share? I did throw together a few slides, and I want to talk about nutrition and maybe a little bit of a different way to think about nutrition. I think normally what we think about is vitamins and minerals, but there's so much more to human health and nutrition. And so what I want to do tonight is couch this conversation around what I call kind of disruptive innovation, and especially what's been disruptive in the nutritional space. So first, let's talk about what is disruptive innovation. Well, I think most people on this call are going to know that a disruptive innovation is really anything that creates an entirely new market. And eventually that new market or widget will disrupt even the most well-established market-leading companies in the world. And most likely it's going to drive them out of business. So let's talk about a few examples. Like let's think back to the telephone. I think maybe a few of us are old enough to remember having to be tied to the wall with the cord. But look what the cell phone did to the landline phone business when it came out. Think about what the car did to the horse and buggy market. And I would say we're in the midst of another disruptive innovation, and that's being electric cars. And who knows, someday, probably relatively soon, we'll all be driving around in self-driving electric cars. Or the internet. I'm old enough to remember door-to-door salesmen coming around selling encyclopedias. I mean, we had a set, and if you wanted to find anything out, you had to go to the set you had at home, or you had to go to a library. But think about what the internet has done, and especially Wikipedia to the encyclopedia market. Or think about what the internet's done to the entire library space. This is an interesting example, but here's one of film photography. Kodak was originally approached in the 1970s with the technology to do digital photography. They ended up turning it down and passing on it because they said it would cannibalize their film business. But because they were slow to adapt and embrace a disruptive technology, Kodak is no longer in business today, how we once knew it. If you think about what the iPhone has done to the cell phone industry, it's pretty phenomenal. I recently rewatched Steve Jobs launching the iPhone for the first time. And he had to say no fewer than 5 times that this was a device that could not only make phone calls, but could browse the internet and take all of your music around with you. I think with every cell phone we purchase these days, that's the minimum of what we expect our cell phone to do. So very innovative when it came out. I mean, think about how we're meeting here tonight. I'm old enough to remember having to put little photographic slides into a carousel, praying to God I had them in the right order ahead of time. So as I'm clicking through the presentations, the right slides coming up. But then think about what PowerPoint and Keynote did to presentations. And now we can all just get together from anywhere in the world on Zoom. Or the gig economy, or these so-called side hustle gigs that are around now. Think about what Uber and Lyft have done to the taxi market, or what VRBO and Airbnb have done to the resort and hotel space. You can even probably throw direct selling into this mix as well. It's just retail has constantly been changing over, I would say, the last 10 years. And this is largely due to this gig economy. But what about disruptive innovation in nutrition? And I would like to argue that there basically hasn't been any disruption in nutrition in the last few decades, actually. And to kind of plant that seed, let me ask you a question. Not that I expect anybody to actually know the answer, but do you know when the last 3 essential vitamins were discovered? Vitamin K was discovered in 1939. Folate was discovered in 1941. And the last vitamin to be discovered was vitamin B12 in 1948. So the reason I put these dates up on the screen is to make the point that for literally the last 70 to 80 years, we have known everything the human body needs to function. And this is why I think we see so many different marketing spins and angles in the nutritional space, because companies are trying to put new marketing spins on a really old story. But where has there been disruptive innovation in nutrition? And like I said, I would argue there hasn't been any until relatively recently. And where that innovation is occurring is in this concept of nutrigenomics. And I know it's a big scientific word. I promise we're not going to get too scientific tonight, but if you break that word down into its parts, you can see the words nutrition and genomics. And so we really are in the midst of this nutrigenomics revolution, and this notion that we can utilize nutrients from nature to actually turn on these health promoting genes that are inherent inside of every single one of our bodies. And so this is kind of where I want to focus the rest of the conversation tonight, and that is around nutrigenomics and this concept of nutrients working to unlock these health promoting genes. And so to understand nutrigenomics, we have to understand 2 other pretty core principles. And that first one is cellular signaling, which is nothing more than this internal communication network that every cell in our body has. And then the other thing we need to talk about is gene activation, and this notion that not all of our genes are on all the time. And in fact, as we get older and older and older, those genes tend to default to off. And so being able to reactivate these genes and reawaken them and unlock these health promoting mechanisms is a very solid approach to help us stay as healthy for as long as possible. So let's talk about cell signaling and gene activation. And to get into that story, I'm going to start by asking you guys a question. And that is, do we need a brain to be intelligent? Is it this 3-pound organ sitting on top of our organ that is responsible for intelligence on the face of this earth? So let's go back to the definition of intelligence. And that definition starts with the ability to learn or understand things. I think this is the traditional definition of intelligence we tend to think about. It's that kid that was really smart in school, went to a good college, and then got that quote unquote dream job when he or she graduated. But what's intriguing to me about this definition is the second part, and that's the ability to deal with new or difficult situations. So as we're kind of going through the next few slides, keep that in the back of your minds, the ability to deal with new or difficult situations. So let's start by talking about a few organisms on this earth and how successful they've been. We'll start with bacteria, and then we'll kind of work our way up the food chain. But bacteria are one of the most successful organisms on the face of this earth. In fact, if you took all of the bacteria on earth and put them on one side of a scale, and then put all the humans on earth on the other side of the scale, the bacteria would far outweigh humans on the face of this earth. They're single-celled organisms, have a very simple genome, and clearly don't have a brain. But yet, how have they been even more successful than we have on earth? Or if you think about seeds, if I put a seed in the ground, how do those roots know to grow down, and those leaves know how to grow up? Ants, how do they know how to follow a trail to go find food and water, and then follow that same trail back to the nest? Fish, so now we're getting into some simple vertebrates, but how do fish know how to swim in schools for safety? Or dogs, how do they know how to fetch? Well, let's look at most mammals. Most mammals can actually get up and walk minutes after they're born. So would we say that a horse is more intelligent than a human? And just in case you didn't know, horses actually have quite small brains, especially relative to their body weight. But let's look at some examples in ourselves. If I get a small little paper cut on my finger, does that wound heal up on its own, or do I have to consciously think about it to heal? I think the answer is it really just happens on its own. And the wound healing process is actually, it's incredibly fascinating and is this very stepwise process that our bodies undergo that's led mostly by our immune system, and really, I think, an underappreciated role that our immune system plays in our bodies. Again, think about yourself sitting here. Are you thinking about all of that blood that's flowing through your veins and your arteries? Are you thinking about all of those nerve impulses that are going up and down your bodies? Are you sitting there thinking about your breathing or digesting your last meal? Or if you were fortunate enough to get a workout in today, are you thinking about your bones and your muscles remodeling to build back stronger for your next workout? Or are these things just happening? So again, coming back to this question, do we need a brain to be intelligent, or is intelligence living somewhere else inside of our bodies? So what would you say everything that I showed you had in common, from bacteria up into humans? What would you call everything that we just saw? Would you call it luck, skill, adaptation? Maybe getting a little bit closer, but if you were to ask me what I would call it instinct. Okay, so then where inside of us does this instinct live? Well, it lives inside of our DNA and our genes. I'm not sure if, can you guys see red lines on the screen? I'm not sure if that's me drawing or not, but anyway, so if we go back to this instinct living inside of our DNA and our genes, an analogy that I like is one of a blueprint. So here, as you can see on the screen, there's a picture of a blueprint. Now, is there a lot of information inside of this blueprint? Absolutely there is. But can that piece of paper actually build the house? And the answer is, of course it can't, right? A piece of paper can't drive nails, it can't pour concrete. It takes a really skilled worker to be able to read that blueprint and then be able to direct a skilled team of workers to actually build that house. So then who or what would be the workers inside of the cell? Well, the answer is proteins, and probably better said would be enzymes. So protein enzymes that are actually doing the work. And enzymes are really nothing more than little machines inside of the cell that are conducting and facilitating all of that biochemistry that's happening inside of our cells. Okay, so now we know DNA and genes is just housing information. We know that proteins and enzymes are actually doing the work, but who is the boss inside of the cell? Who's directing everybody to do their job? And the answer is it's cell signaling. And it's probably even better to say it's this highly coordinated process of cellular signaling that's the boss inside of the cell. And so really, if you remember, cellular signaling is nothing more than this communication network inside of the cell. And it's working as simply as something's activating A tells B tells C tells D, and then something happens inside of the cell. So this would be a schematic I would have used during my research days. And this is actually an image of just one of hundreds, if not thousands, of different cell signaling pathways inside of the cell. And I put this image up on the screen, not to walk through it and make you guys all molecular biologists in 30 minutes, but just to illustrate the complexity that's going on inside of our cells. And again, this is just one of hundreds, if not thousands, of these cell signaling pathways. But as complicated as it looks, it's still nothing more spectacular than A gets activated, A tells B tells C tells D, and then something happens inside of the cell. All right, so now we know where the information is. We know who's doing the work. We know that cell signaling is the boss, but what is that thing that's activating protein A? And that would be these things called receptors. And receptors are nothing more than little sensing molecules that are floating around the cell, waiting for the right signal to come along and activate it. And really, these receptors are a lot like a lock and key. There's a lot of different receptors or sensor molecules floating around the cell, and there's a lot of signals that can activate these different receptors. But there's also a lot of specificity to the process. So just like the key to my front door won't unlock your front door, and the keys to your front door won't unlock my front door, we have a very similar specificity happening here with the signal and these receptors. And so you can actually see, if we go back to this schematic, at the top, you'll see the word receptor. And then the little gray circles and triangles that you see at the top, those are the signals or the signaling molecules that are going to unlock that receptor, activate it, and then A is going to tell B is going to tell C is going to tell D, and then something is going to happen inside of the cell. Something else I like as an analogy for these cell signaling pathways is a chain of dominoes. And if you've ever seen these big domino exhibitions they set up, they'll start pretty simply, right? Dominoes knocking over other dominoes, but then they love to build up a big grand finale, right? So you knock over these dominoes and then something big happens. There's some terminal consequence where something has happened. And so I'm going to show you a little video that kind of illustrates this point, but can you see all the different aspects of cell signaling here? So where would the signal molecule be? It would be that gentleman's finger. Where would that receptor molecule be? It would be that first domino, and then A tells B tells C, and then eventually something big happens. So you can see just a simple, tiny little input, one domino knocking over two, ultimately ends up knocking down every single domino in that video. This is important because there can also be signal amplification that occurs. And this is the real power of being able to activate these cell signaling pathways how and when we want, because we can amplify the signal through these cell signaling pathways. And I can probably give you a couple of real world examples you might be familiar with. So if I were to go to the gym and inject, small amounts of testosterone, I would be able to put on unphysiological amounts of muscle mass. We can give women tiny little birth control pills and completely remodel their reproductive physiology. And the reason that happens is because that small input activating cell signaling pathways, you get this signal amplification, and massive things can happen inside of our bodies. And so here would be another way to illustrate that point, talking about signal amplification. So the first domino here only weighs a couple of grams, and the last domino in this string weighs about 100 pounds or about 50 kilograms. So another great way to show the signal amplification that can occur. And this is exactly what's coordinating cellular function. And if I were to ask you all, what is the purpose of these cell signaling pathways? What should your response be? Well, the role of those cell signaling pathways is to be able to sense its environment around the cell or inside of it. And it allows the cell the ability to react and respond to both that internal and external environment. This is what's coordinating that cellular instinct. And so if you can remember that definition of intelligence, that ability to understand or deal with difficult situations, this is exactly what cell signaling pathways are doing. And it doesn't matter which cell signaling pathway I show you, they're all working under this same principle. And so this notion of nutrigenomics wasn't even coined until 2004 or 2005, and it came about just after the human genome was sequenced. And for me, this was the work that cemented the concept of nutrigenomics and how nutrients in very small doses can have massive consequences to our health, and in this case, in a very positive way. So let me tell you this scientific story. So these researchers wanted to look at why chocolate, and especially that really dark, bitter chocolate, was so good for our health, and especially so good for our cardiovascular health. So these scientists went into chocolate and they started teasing out compounds. Scientists are maybe a little bit lazy. They start with things that are in like the largest quantities. So they were looking at things like the fat from the cocoa butter. They were looking at other compounds in chocolate that were there in great concentrations, but they were never able to replicate the results. So then these scientists turned their attention to these compounds in chocolate that were found in very low concentrations. So that was a surprise, one. Two, when they gave these nutrients back to humans to try to replicate the results, what they found was these compounds were very poorly bioavailable, so they weren't absorbed well. The compounds that were absorbed were very quickly metabolized and then excreted from our bodies. So how in the world could compounds that are found in such small quantities, that are poorly absorbed, that are quickly metabolized and excreted from our bodies, have such profound effects on our overall health? After a series of follow-up studies, what they found was these compounds from chocolate could not make it directly into the cell. So what they were able to figure out is that these compounds were able to bind to receptors on these cells that activated these cell signaling pathways that turned on these genes that are responsible for cardiovascular health improvements. And so this is exactly that concept of nutrigenomics. utilizing nutrition to activate cell signaling pathways to ultimately turn on and activate these health promoting genes that are found inside of us. And so this is exactly what we can do. We can look at nutrients that are going to work on certain cell signaling pathways that we want, or what we call the switch or the target. And then if we can do that, we can elicit these massive health benefits to the user. And in this case, it would be, we know if we can activate the NRF2 pathway, we can reduce oxidative stress by 40% in just 30 days. It's amazing. And this is the power of nutrigenomics. And this whole concept of nutrigenomics is woven throughout our entire product portfolio. I mean, whether we're talking about hair care, skin care, you heard Susan talking about gut health. We even have some brain health products or nootropics that are working nutrigenomically to keep our brains working at their peak capacity. So it literally doesn't matter what product we're talking about in our product portfolio. We are encompassing this concept of nutrigenomics across the product line. And this is exactly how LifeVantage has been and will continue to be the pioneer and disrupting in human nutrition. And exactly why we say, flip the switch, feel better so you can do more. So with that, Jamie and Susan, I'll hand it back over to you. And I hope that gives everyone just kind of a quick overview of this concept of nutrigenomics.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you for all that. Thank you for the slides. I could see what you were doing there with those red lines. You were letting us say, hey, read between the lines, because what we have is we have a movement. We're revolutionizing the health industry with these products. And so thanks for that. But we have one question. I have a question that I want to get to in the chat. And so there's a question here. So why in our products do we use seed oils? Because in research and understanding, seed oils can be somewhat inflammatory.
Yeah, and product development is interesting, and I love it. I wouldn't change it for the world. When we're going and we're evaluating any nutrient that's going to be in our products, we're looking at many different aspects of the ingredient. We're of course looking for safety, we're looking for efficacy, we're looking for bioavailability, and of course we're looking for the benefits that we want. So we will take into consideration all different aspects. And just to say it pretty simply, sometimes the best scientific case for a nutrient is synthetic. Sometimes the best case for a nutrient is the natural form. Sometimes that nutrient should come from, let's say, an animal oil like a fish oil. Sometimes it should come from a seed oil. So we're evaluating any ingredient for many different aspects of science, just to make sure they're as efficacious and of course as safe as possible.
And thanks for that. And I just want to ask everybody on the call, would it be okay if you felt 10 years younger, 20 years younger, or 30 years younger? And I see some nodding heads out there. Like, yeah, I think we'd all say, yeah, I'd feel okay with that. So if you're nodding your head and you're saying you'd be all right with that, just get with the person that shared this link with you and ask them, how to get involved, how to get your hands on the product. Because what we have our hands on is disrupting the technologies. Okay, it's just disrupting. I think right now there's 12 disruptive technologies that are out there in our space, right? So one of them is AI. We all understand that. 3D printing is another one. Another one is cloud technologies. So we have a product that is the #1 clinically researched product that is disrupting the health industry. There's only one technology disruptor in the health industry, and we have our hands on it. So this is a movement, this is disrupting the health industry. If you see yourself as a person that wants to help revolutionize how we look at human health, then please get with the person that shared this link with you and ask them how you can get involved, how you can get the products and get involved. And before we say goodbye, I'm going to hand it over to Susan to wrap it up. Thank
Yeah,
you.
and if you have any questions, I know this is a lot of information, and I've been in the health and wellness industry for a long time, ever since I got out of the military. 19 years ago, 18, 19 years ago. And this was still new information for me. Studied functional medicine. We've taken great care of our body, had a lot of interest, and still a lot of this information, the first time I heard it, I had to hear it in layers. So
I still don't understand it.
So, but we appreciate you taking this really complex science and giving us a visual for it, Dr. Dixon. And more importantly, the thing that you really need to know about this is it's really simple to incorporate in your daily life. So whether you're interested in just using the products, and you don't need to know the science, you just you believe in the power of plants and you know that there's science behind it, that's great. But if you want to dive in and learn more, there's certainly lots of people who can share more information with you. And Dr. Dixon has tons of great videos specific to each of our products. So reach out, like Jamie said, reach out to the person who invited you to this call, and they can give you some more detailed information on the individual products. So thank you again for your time. We appreciate each and every one of you being on this call and your presence. And certainly, Dr. Dixon, thank you so much. Happy birthday to your beautiful wife. And we look forward to seeing you soon.
Yeah, likewise. Look forward to seeing you guys. And thanks again for having me. All the best, everyone. And thanks for taking the time this evening.